Good evening and welcome. Tonight we'll be going over the history of Antigua and Barbuda. And I have this very zoomed out view of the Caribbean for you so you could see exactly where Antigua and Barbuda is located. Which, if you haven't spotted it yet, it's right here. There's Antigua and there's Barbuda. Antigua and Barbuda. So as you can see, these islands are located in the Leeward Islands in an area known as the Lesser Antilles in the Caribbean. There are lots and lots of islands in the Leeward Islands that belong to other countries like France, the UK, the US, and the Netherlands. Their closest neighbor is one of the very few independent nations. You can see St. Kitts and Nevis right here. Not too far away, but they're also pretty close to all these other islands. And Guadeloupe is down here. It's owned by France, and Montserrat's over here, owned by the UK. And yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to show you so you could get a good idea of where we are in the world, because it's a very tiny place surrounded by many other tiny places. Just to give you a perspective of where it is. Next, I'm going to show you the map that's in this book. We'll go over the history of Antigua and Barbuda when I'm done with geography, and then we'll look at all the wonderful pictures inside this book. So, we flip to the map back here. Oop. There we go. So, here we see Antigua. Up here is Barbuda. Over here, ta-da, is a very tiny little rocky island called Redonda. It belongs to Antigua and Barbuda, but it is uninhabited, and we'll talk about why in its history. So, as you can see, here's Antigua, the main island, where pretty much everybody in Antigua and Barbuda lives. But let's check out Barbuda, because I actually have a very good map of Antigua in my atlas, but I don't have one of Barbuda. So up here you can see Barbuda. You can see just how kind of lagoony it is. It is a coral island, so once upon a time it was a coral atoll until it rose up. So you can still see some lagoony areas that atolls have. There's a salt pond over there as well. For the most part, Barbuda is pretty flat. There's only a very little hilly section over here that you can see. And the main town here is called Codrington, which we're going to learn a lot more about in its history. And what's interesting about Barbuda, we're going to talk about this more in its history as well, but the few people that live here, how do I put this? They don't own the property, I guess. Everyone on Barbuda owns Barbuda. There's no private property. Everything belongs to everyone. There's, like I said, there's only a couple thousand or so people who call Barbuda home, so everything belongs to everyone in a sense. It's the best way I can describe it. Alright, so you can kind of see the distance here between these islands in little Redonda way over here. Let me flip over to my atlas so you can see the map that's in there. Alright, the little map here is located kind of in an awkward part of my book. I'm kind of like reaching over my whole desk to reach it. But anyway, here is Antigua. The capital city is St. John's. You can see right here inside St. John's Bay. There's lots of different little bays, as you can see here. And lots of little islets as well. There's about 30 different islets all around Antigua. Most of them are privately owned, so they're not like little bustling rocks or anything. Antigua is a volcanic island made of volcanic limestone, unlike Barbuda. Like I said, that was a coral island. So once upon a time this was a volcano, but it is no more. There is no more volcanic activity on Antigua. The highest point is right here. It is called Boggy Peak, and once upon a time, as you can see on this map, it was renamed to Mount Obama After Barack Obama was elected president in the United States, they renamed the mountain Mount Obama, even though Obama has absolutely no relation to Antigua, and from what I know, he's never visited. So they changed it back to Boggy Peak in, I want to say, 2016. I don't know why this map still says Mount Obama. Maybe it's still nicknamed that or something. And usually on Caribbean islands, you only see the towns on the coast here because the interior is all, jungly, or there's a volcano or something. Not quite the case in Antigua. You can see lots of different towns in the center, and you can even see how the island's divided up into all of its different parishes here as well. Not like counties or states, but parishes. So because Antigua doesn't have like a big active caldera in the middle of the island, there can be lots of other little towns and things. Throughout, we'll talk about a couple of them in its history. That's where the airport's located. There are some naturally jungly parts of Antigua, just not as much as in other Caribbean islands, I suppose I'd say. And quite a bit of agriculture happening on Antigua, not like tons, but enough. They have the very famous Antigua black pineapple growing here. There's lots of really beautiful wildlife things on Antigua and Barbuda. We'll talk about why in its history. And for the most part, I think that's all I really wanted to talk about in terms of geography. Anything else is going to come up in its history, so let's get into that. So, it is estimated, based on radiocarbon dating, that in about the year 3100 BCE was when the Siboney people first arrived on Antigua. There's some artifacts, some old settlements that have been found. They had some like rock art that they left behind, so we can actually date that, which is interesting because a lot of Caribbean countries, I've noticed in my research, we know who lived there, but we don't know when. We just know that they lived there at some point, so we can pretty much guess when these people moved onto the island, but they apparently eventually left at some point, and we're not quite sure why. But the Arawak people who came from South America, they traveled all throughout the Caribbean, settling islands, and when they came here, they built a lot of agriculture. They grew lots and lots of different crops, including those black pineapples I mentioned. But in about 1200 CE, the Carib people arrived, which, if you know my Caribbean series, the one thing you'll learn is that the Caribs were excessively violent. Now, I've learned that the British actually ran kind of a propaganda movement against the Caribs that portrayed them as cannibals and, like, excessively violent. So, like, they were violent people, but not that violent. They definitely weren't cannibals. They, didn't do half the things that the British said they were doing across the pond. But they were very violent. They would attack the other tribes in the area way before the Europeans arrived and forcefully conquer the area and then fiercely defend it. So thankfully, when Christopher Columbus sailed by, he didn't actually land by. He just sailed by in 1493, named the island, well, he would have called it Antigua. And eventually, the Spanish would try to come by, the British would try to come by, the Dutch, the French, but the Caribs would fight back, as they were known to do. However, enough people came by that smallpox did eventually set in on the island. And in 1632, the British actually managed to settle here since, like I said, St. Kitts and Nevis was just nearby. So they could just hop over because they were colonizing that pretty well, but not this island. So, like I said, smallpox eventually hit the Caribs here. It's believed to have either wiped them out or they left. We don't know, but the last Carib attack was in 1705, and there's no more mention of them in their history, apparently. So when the British settled here, they started to grow tobacco. Apparently that didn't take as well to the soil, so they switched to sugarcane, which at the time was like booming economically over in Europe. So that turned out pretty good for the growers here. And then, of course, for that kind of work, for the amount you need extra labor. So they imported kidnapped Africans as slaves to work here on the island, and there were quite a bit actually. They also, the British, I mean by they, built a lot of forts around the islands. I wonder if any of them are indicated on this map. I don't think there are, but there are quite a bit of fortresses along the coast here. They were never really used. I mean, the French did attempt to take the island in 1666, but there was no, like, epic battle or anything of Antigua. So, these huge forts were built and then just kind of sat there. In 1674, a man named Christopher Codrington arrived, and he decided this was going to be the perfect place to build his sugar empire. He built a huge plantation, filled it with loads of African slaves. My goodness, and he was apparently not very nice to them at all. But he realized that these islands were very windy, with all the trade winds blowing off the Atlantic. So he started to build windmills for the sugarcane production to help crush the cane into the sugar. And this, made his company blow up, and he became extremely wealthy and pretty much took over the island in a way. He got involved in its politics as well, and he rented Barbuda from the British government. Back then it was just kind of nothing really much there. So they were like, sure, you can have it, and he rented it. It was like a 30-year lease, and all he had to pay was 1 fat sheep per year to have this island. So he used Barbuda for quite a few things. He used it to, I guess, build supplies for the sugarcane plantations on Antigua, like maintenance things. I couldn't really find specific, I guess, like repairs and things like that. He also would use slaves over there to do some interesting things. One of which was, because Barbuda is a coral island, right? There's coral reefs around it. They would light fires on the coast at night. So if ships, mostly Spanish ships, would see the fire, be like, oh my gosh, something's happening over there, let's go see if we can help. They'd crash into the coral. The slaves would go out and take whatever they could, and then the Codringtons would sell it or use it however they wanted. And there are still many, many sunken ships around Barbuda to this day because of that. He also turned Barbuda into his vacation spot. He moved a lot of animals over there, things like deer, like things you would hunt. So he and his family would go on vacation over to Barbuda. They would go on like hunting trips and stuff up there. So the slaves up there, they had the town of Codrington, like I showed you. So that's where they lived, and then they would work for him doing various tasks over on Barbuda. And apparently it was a phrase like, oh, don't be bad on Barbuda because your punishment is being sent to Antigua to be very cruelly treated on the sugar plantations. Yikes. Anyway, that's how bad he was. Also on Antigua, I wonder if this is on here as well. Let me see. I'm not sure it is, but maybe you'll see it, but I don't see it. They built a site known as Nelson's Dockyard, and I mention it mainly because it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Do you see it on here? I don't think they indicated it on the map, which is too bad. But I believe it must have been either up in St. John's Harbor or English Harbor. I didn't actually look it up. But Nelson's Dockyard was built in 1725, and it became a very crucial port for the English, as their ships going back and forth through this area of the world. They could rely on that for repairs or to dock if there was a storm coming, or if there's any kind of crisis. They knew that they could stop at Antigua before heading out to England on the last bit of their voyage. So it became a very crucial place for the English. They really relied on that. So, as I said, Antigua had some pretty cruel treatment of their slaves, and that led to quite a few slave revolts. There were some big ones in 1701 and 1729, but the most famous was in 1736. It was led by a slave who went by Prince Claus, and it was foiled before it could even happen, and he was executed. And I mention that because today Prince Claus is considered like one of the great legendary national heroes of Antigua and Barbuda. But eventually, slave was abolished in 1834, and you can see on this map some of the towns that the freed slaves established. Liberta was the first one. You can also see Freetown over here. And it's one of the reasons why, there's so many little towns on the inside, whereas, the outside is where the money makers are, but the inside, that's where, people would just live and work agriculture and subsistence farm, have their own little lives. Meanwhile, remember I mentioned Redonda, that little rock? It's like way out there. Apparently the Codringtons would breed deer on that island to then import to Barbuda so they could hunt it. Kind of weird. But in the 1860s, they realized that it was full of guano, or bird poop, which they could harvest and sell to make fertilizer, which they started to do, and eventually started to mine phosphates, which became very lucrative for them. But in 1929, the whole industry on Redonda was destroyed in a hurricane, and they just kind of threw their hands in the air and left it. And to this day, Redonda is uninhabited. No one lives there, no one works there. There's nothing there now. In 1943, a man named Veer Cornwall Bird was elected to the head of a labor union. Now, let me talk about Veer Bird, because what an interesting character. He was born into poverty on Antigua, had an elementary school education, joined the Salvation Army as a teenager, and went to various islands around the Caribbean, where he really saw just how impoverished a lot of these places were and wanted to do something about it. So he started to form labor unions, form protests, stand up for a lot of workers' rights, and eventually, did the same on his home island of Antigua, and he was very beloved for it. Eventually, his labor union turned into a political party, and he became the head of it. So once Antigua gained independence on November 1st, 1981, he became the first Prime Minister of Antigua. Before that, though, Antigua joined the West Indies Federation that lasted from 1958 to 1962, which was an attempt to unify all of the British territories in the Caribbean into kind of one lumped country, but that didn't work at all. And as you saw on the big map, there are still a lot of territories that are still part of the UK. They didn't seek independence, but Antigua and Barbuda, thanks to Veer Bird and his push for independence, they were granted it. It is still part of the Commonwealth of Nations, however, which is another form of a big club of former British colonies that are in this club, but they're not officially part of Great Britain, but they recognize Queen Elizabeth II as their monarch and head of state, and they have a person on each place in the Commonwealth representing the Queen, and it's an interesting little thing. So they were there. So Veer Bird becomes Prime Minister, and he and his family wind up dominating Antiguan politics. His son's eventually elected, Lester Bird, and his whole family gets involved in politics. He eventually resigned in, I want to say the 1990s. I'm going to say 94 or something. I'll look it up. Due to his health, but his family was there to take over, and this was very, very scandalous because the Bird family. Veer Bird is the number one national hero of Antigua and Barbuda. but his family did some shady stuff. They were accused of rampant corruption. There was drug trafficking from one of Fairbird's sons, I think. Anyway, weapons trafficking. There was fraud charges against Lester Bird, and it got to the point where in 2002, the party that the Birds belonged to and the people were like fed up with it, and they led protests calling for him to resign. He didn't, but he got voted out in 2004. There are still some members of the Bird family involved in politics, but they haven't led the country since then, and probably never will, to be honest. That's pretty much how things were in Antigua and Barbuda for quite a while. Heavily relying on tourism, things like that, like most Caribbean islands. However, in 2017, Hurricane Irma blew by, directly hit Barbuda, and completely wiped out like 99% of the buildings there. And thankfully, many people were evacuated beforehand, thankfully. Not everyone, and some people did lose their lives, but the island was destroyed. So rebuilding has been very complicated. From what I've gathered, it's not complete. There's a lot of ickiness in the way. Political ickiness, I suppose. They've received a lot of aid from other countries around the world. But like I said in the beginning, there is no private property on Barbuda. Everyone owns everything. It's a big collective island. Because, it's so small and remote, and only like 1,000-something people live there. So, like, what's the point, So, the current leader, or the leader at the time, I guess, proposed to buy the land from the locals there for $1, like, per person, and then basically just like give it back to them so that they could figure out, because you can't really rebuild everything when you can't really claim, oh, my house was destroyed but everyone owned my house. I guess ickiness, right? Very complicated. So it's still quite a lot, and people of Barbuda are really sticking up for themselves, which is great. But anyway, that's pretty much where we are, the history of Antigua and Barbuda. So let me grab my book and we'll look at some pictures. Okay, I think I've zoomed out enough to fit what I can for the book in here. So the Caribbean, right? Gorgeous beaches and everything. Definitely all the things you'd associate with it. We've got some sweet faces over here. Let's see, a sign for the Labor candidate. I'm reading the little political stuff down here. This is the party that VC Bird founded. But anyway, I'm not going to get too political here. So here is St. John's, the capital. Isn't that lovely? And here is a Independence Parade, and you can see this was during the COVID pandemic. Gorgeous water. Beautiful, beautiful. This is English Harbor. Stunning, right? Gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. This is St. John's, and you can see the St. John's Cathedral right there. This is like the biggest fort that the British built, Fort James, which is just kind of there, I guess. So when you go to a pink sand beach, this is what the pink sand is. It's a bunch of little shells all crushed up to make the sand. So that neat. Here's some devastation from Hurricane Irma on Codrington and Barbuda. We have breadfruit, one of the staples of the diet there. This is actually Montserrat. It's very volcanic, when Antigua's not. It blew its top in 2002, but there was another 96 and 97. Okay, it's blown its top quite a bit, so a lot of people from Montserrat evacuated to Antigua, so that's why it's mentioned here. You got some whistling ducks, very cute. I don't want to skip a page. There we go. Some fallow deer, which you don't really think of Caribbean having deer, but that's thanks to the Codringtons, because they wanted to hunt deer. So they did. A sundial that's at Nelson's Dockyard. A tarpon, a big old fish. Go on, blub. Oops. These pages are very stuck together. A cannon at Fort James. Let's see. An illustration from 1823, and they're loading some barrels onto there so they could take it to the ship to send it out. We can see one of the windmills back there too. Sugar plantation. Oh, an even better view. An old drawing of what it would look like out in the field. And here's some windmills as they look today, very abandoned. And this is the fortress near Nelson's Dockyard. Let's see. Colonial military complex. You can see the little flag that they have. They have a really neat flag. I like it because you can see the sun and the water, the beach. I like that. We've got, this is at Shirley Heights. Fort Berkeley, one of the forts there. Here is a huge statue of Sir Vere Cornwall Bird. I'm telling you, he's very revered on this island. He did so much for the country, for its independence. Let's see, this is a government building, but it doesn't say what kind of government building. It just says government building. Alright, the entry hall to the governor's house in St. John's. This is where the Governor General that represents Queen Elizabeth II lives and works, I suppose. What else do we have? A military band. We got some money here. They use the East Caribbean dollar. Man, these pages are stuck together. Come on, you. There we go. This little souvenir shop, so colorful. Relying heavily on that tourism dollar, you know. Some more shopping here. And here's some black pineapples being grown. Fishing boats. Oh, hey rooster. My goodness, he's loud. We have a new rooster, if you haven't heard. Where did I mention that? Anyway, we have a new rooster. He doesn't crow nearly as much, but my goodness, he's loud. Anyway, this is one of the beautiful bays. You can see some cactus there. I'm sorry if that's really loud. I'll try to turn him down. A little starfish out in the water. A very sweet little hawksbill turtle. Oh, snake warning, snake warning, snake warning. I apologize. But first, here are some black pineapples. And let me show you the snake. So I apologize if you're very sensitive about snakes. But this is the Antiguan racer. And apparently they had imported mongooses to kill them off. And you know, now they have a mongoose problem. And still snakes. Okay, snake is gone. Here's some frigate birds. They don't really show them on here, but they have these cool red pouches. So you can kind of see one right there. So I think when they're attracting the mate, they inflate this, and it's pretty wild. They're pretty cool birds. Let's see. Make sure I'm not skipping any pages. Devil's Bridge. Isn't that neat? There's a wonderful smile there. Their school uniform. Let's see, it says spectators for carnival. Look at this. She's ready for carnival. For sure. Here's a shipwreck. Isn't that neat? Oh, some wonderful faces here with Prince Harry. Downtown. Just like a casual day, I guess. So it says she just got her roof fixed. She lives in Codrington. It says she'd been living in a tent with her family for 9 months until her Codrington home, which was ravaged by Hurricane Irma in September 2017, was finally repaired. Fantastic. That must have been a horrible experience. So, I live in like the earthquake place, right? But I'd much rather live in an earthquake place than a hurricane place or a tornado place. But anyway. So it says this is a December day. So, being where they are, it's kind of beautiful all the time. Rainy sometimes, but beautiful. I want to see Joe Mike's. What is it? It is I can't see. Oh, a hotel. Oh, Joe Mike's Hotel. That sounds fun. And they're playing some steel drums. Looks like it's music class. That was always the best. Bus station terminal. Oh, there's the St. John's Cathedral. Let's see, cathedral dates to 1845, but there are other churches that date, or the first one dates to 1681. And she's praying at her pew there. This is a very old looking church made out of green limestone. And here's a Rastafarian, another religion that is practiced, there's the word, on Antigua and Barbuda. There's a sign for Nelson's Dockyard, UNESCO World Heritage Site. Let's see, exotic Antigua. Here's the duty free. Awesome. Steel drum player. What else do we have? Oh, some art for sale. Oh, isn't that lovely? Okay, which one do you want to buy? I would purchase. I think I like this one. That's very nice, but they're all very beautiful. Little pottery shop. These are some of my favorite shops. I love family shops that are in the house, in the neighborhood. You find some great stuff there. Playing the drums as he's busking. The Museum of Antigua and Barbuda. And it used to be, I wonder if it says here. It used to be, I don't think it says it here. I'm trying to remember. Oh, it used to be the courthouse. It says it right there. And some steel drums for sale. The airport. You can take one home. Say you've been to the Caribbean. Sailing. Beautiful water. Sir Vivian Richards, a very famous cricket player. There's a statue. And this is at a regatta, a yacht race. And some board game. It looks like Mancala, but I bet it's different rules because Mancala, well, I was about to say Mancala's from Africa, but then many Africans came to Antigua, so it may just very well be Mancala. That's one of my favorite games. It's so much fun. Festivals making cassava pancakes, it says, for Independence Day. Yum yum. My goodness, they're stuck together. Oh, how wonderful. This is for Carnival. You can go all out in your outfits. And it's Christmas here. Isn't that? I like that tree. And here's a farmer's market, it says. How neat. Get some really fresh stuff. And a street vendor there. Super, super fresh. So this is fungi, I think it's called. And pepper pot, which I was reading this before. It sounds really yummy. And jerk chicken, of course. Amazing. I wonder if the jerk chicken on Antigua differs from jerk chicken on Jamaica. I wonder. Let's see, the foods here: salt fish and ducana, which is spiced sweet potato coconut dumpling. It's served on the leaf here. Interesting. And there's the map I showed you before. I already saw that. You can see Boggy Peak, it says there, not Mount Obama anymore. You can see kind of the more foresty areas. I guess I didn't mention that. Pretty hilly down here in this part. I should have mentioned that in geography. Oh well. Anyway, that's going to be it for tonight. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this video relaxing and educational. I have one more Caribbean country for you this week. I last did St. Vincent and the Grenadines. There's one more coming up. So subscribe so you don't miss out. Thank you again and have a very good night.